A sitting attorney general just went on national television and appeared to threaten a member of Congress. Millions watched it play out live, and within hours the internet exploded. Some called it arrogance, others called it abuse of power, but for Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett it was personal. She didn't stay silent, she fired back, and what she said may go down as one of the most powerful political responses of the year. It started on Fox News, or as Crockett called it, faux news. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General, was there taking aim at a sitting lawmaker. For most people it was just another fiery TV segment, but for Crockett it crossed a line. Because when the nation's top legal mind uses her platform to send a threat, that isn't just commentary.
Thank the chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Jasmine Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I first just want to begin with a news alert. Guess what? Joe Biden is not the president anymore. So maybe we can move on. Maybe we can move into the present, because it seems like we are living in the past. And listen, these are not the good old days, you know, like you used to sit around and your grandparents would talk to you about what used to happen. What we need to be talking about is how we are going to legislate, because I think that some of my colleagues have confused what our jobs are. And I get that we're sitting in judiciary. And so it may seem as if we are here to be litigators, but we are here to be legislators, which means that we are supposed to be writing laws, not trying to have our own trials and determine whether or not something is true or not, or whatever the case is, or who should be sued, who shouldn't be sued. All I know is that a great American hero, a good senator out of New Jersey, said something to the effect yesterday as he was shattering the record for holding the floor, a record that had been held by another racist in this country. As he shattered that, he said something about the fact that this should not be about left versus right. It should be about right versus wrong. And I am going to tell you that I want us to focus on right versus wrong. The reason that we are struggling right now in this country as it relates to people not trusting agencies, honestly, a lot of it is because of elected leaders. Let me tell you, one of the things that the chairman and I actually agree upon, we don't agree on a lot, is that we both know that there has been a sharp incline as it relates to threats upon our lives. Regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, we both know and agree that as sitting members of Congress, we both are enduring more death threats than anybody should in this country. And I believe that it is because of the divisive rhetoric, and it is because of the selective enforcement of things. And so when we have, and I'm gonna be clear, because I had remarks and I'm going a whole other way. To have the sitting attorney general go on, and I'm gonna call it faux news. I know some of y'all love it, but it's fake to me. To have her go on Fox News and to then decide that she wanted to send a threat to me, it was wrong. Because here it is, she is the highest law enforcement agent in this country, and people are watching and they are consuming this information, and they are believing that simply because I decided that I wanted to exercise my right to free speech, which I am not abridged from doing, that she then wanted to then politicize something that should not be politicized. I don't like Elon Musk. I'm gonna say it 50,000 times. I don't like him. I don't like that he going out there and he firing people. I think that he's a crook, because somehow the rest of us can't sit around and get whatever federal contracts we want. The rest of us can't sit around and get law enforcement and get them somehow ordained as federal law enforcement to protect him. The rest of us can't get our dealerships protected by the federal government. That is somebody that is operating above the law. For whatever reason, just because he has a lot of money, more money than everybody else. And yes, I am happy to see that on my birthday, which is what I said, there were peaceful protests around this world against him, because he is a problem. And so you never should have somebody that is sitting that high and is going to sit up here and threaten a sitting member of Congress when she knew good and well, if she watched the entire thing, that I specifically told protesters to make sure you consult with lawyers, just like I've told protesters over and over and over in the history of me advising people to go out and exercise their constitutional right. The fact that there are other sitting members that have received letters of threat from this new DOJ tells me that they are about retribution and they are not about following the law. The reason that our party, or I won't even say our party, our country is torn apart is because we can't even agree on right versus wrong. This should not be left versus right. The only thing that we're asking is that we have law enforcement that will show up when there is an actual crime. If somebody calls and says, hey, I need you to investigate this cyber crime, or I need you to investigate this child pornography, or I need you to investigate this robbery, then we want somebody to show up, and we don't want them to look at us and act as if just because I'm black or because I'm woman that I am not worthy of having that case investigated, because we have an administration that is continuously railing against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we don't need people that show up that feel like diversity should not be valued. That is why we should have somebody that may show up and looks like me. The final thing that I'll say, because you've been gracious, is this. When I first became a public defender, I had no criminal defense experience. And I walked in and I told my boss, Charlie, I said, listen, you should hire me. He said, why? I said, because I'm black. Charlie looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, let me tell you something. When I walk in, I'm going to walk in with a level of rapport and understanding that maybe some of my other colleagues will not. Charlie offered me my job, and I worked my butt off, and I worked really, really hard for all of my clients, not just those that look like me, and that is what it looks like to serve. Thank you.
That's intimidation, and Crockett wasn't about to let it slide. The moment she saw it, she knew the stakes were bigger than her. This wasn't left versus right. This was about the idea that someone in power could try to silence an elected official for exercising her right to speak. That's not democracy, she said. That's danger. And she wasn't wrong, because in today's political climate, words from powerful people can ignite real-world threats. Crockett made it clear that these aren't theoretical concerns, they're life-and-death issues. She told the chamber that she and her colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, have faced more death threats than ever before. Every hateful message, every act of intimidation comes from one root cause: divisive rhetoric, the kind that treats politics like war, not governance. And when that rhetoric comes from the top, from the people who are supposed to uphold the law, it corrodes trust in every institution that protects us. She didn't hold back. It's wrong, she said, for the highest law enforcement agent in this country to threaten a sitting member of Congress. Because when people see it on TV, they believe it's acceptable. They start to think that power means impunity, that if someone in authority mocks or targets an elected official, then ordinary citizens can too. That's why Crockett's response hit such a nerve. It wasn't just outrage, it was accountability. It was a reminder that in a democracy, no one, not even a former attorney general, is above the law. But that moment on Fox was just the spark. What came next would pull the curtain back on something much deeper: how power and privilege have bent the rules of justice in America. Because after calling out the threat, Crockett pivoted straight to one of the most controversial figures on the planet, Elon Musk. And she didn't mince words. I don't like him, she said. I think he's a crook. It wasn't about personal dislike. It was about what he represents: wealth so massive it can bend policy, influence law enforcement, and blur the lines between private power and public authority. Crockett pointed out something most people never think about. Why is it that billionaires can get security from federal agencies, while average citizens can't even get their cases investigated? Why can the ultra-rich fire thousands of workers, ignore regulations, and still get contracts from the same government that claims to protect fairness? She accused the system of catering to the powerful while leaving the public behind. And when you listen to her tone, it isn't jealousy. It's fury, the fury of someone who's seen ordinary people lose everything while billionaires keep rewriting the rules. She mentioned how Musk, with all his influence and money, seems to operate under a different set of laws, and she's not alone. There's been a growing buzz online about how corporate elites get government protection for their assets, while working people get bureaucratic indifference. Crockett tied this double standard directly to the broader issue: selective justice, a system that bends for money but breaks people without it. But that wasn't the whole story, she said. Because when law enforcement becomes political, nobody is safe. That line cut deep. For years, politicians have accused one another of weaponizing justice, but this was different. She was pointing the finger at the culture that allows intimidation, hypocrisy, and silence to thrive. When a sitting congresswoman receives a warning from someone who once led the nation's Justice Department, that's not a policy debate. That's a message, and not the kind that keeps people safe. Crockett then shifted to something almost every viewer could relate to: fear. She said many members of Congress have received letters and messages from this new Department of Justice that sound less like policy notices and more like threats. They're about retribution, she said, not about following the law. And in that moment you could feel the air change. Because if even lawmakers are afraid of their government, what hope does an ordinary citizen have? She made it clear that this isn't a left-right fight. It's about right versus wrong. About having law enforcement that shows up when real crimes happen, not just when the targets are politically convenient. She spoke about people who've called for investigations into cyber crimes, child exploitation, or theft, only to be ignored. We want someone to show up, she said, and not look at us like we don't matter. It was one of the most emotional parts of her speech, because behind all the politics and soundbites there's a core truth: when justice depends on who you are, it's not justice anymore. Crockett went further, connecting the problem to bias, the unspoken reality that people of color, women and minorities often face skepticism or dismissal when they report crimes. We have an administration, she said, that rails against diversity and inclusion, and that is exactly why we need people in power who reflect the people they serve. Then came the story that silenced the room. Crockett shared a moment from her past, the first time she walked into a courtroom as a public defender. She admitted she had no criminal defense experience at all, but she looked her boss in the eye and said, "You should hire me because I'm black." That line stunned the audience, but her explanation made everyone understand. She said, "When I walk in, I bring a level of rapport and understanding that some of my colleagues might not." She wasn't asking for special treatment, she was explaining empathy, the kind of connection that comes from shared experiences, from knowing what it's like to be overlooked, and it worked. Her boss hired her. She worked harder than anyone, defending every client, not just those who looked like her, with relentless dedication. That story turned her confrontation with Bondi into something bigger than politics. It became a statement about service. Crockett showed that true leadership isn't about wielding power, it's about using your position to protect people who don't have any. That's what it looks like to serve, she said. And the crowd erupted. But even as the applause faded, her deeper message lingered, a warning about what happens when those in power forget why they were given it in the first place. When law enforcement becomes a weapon, democracy becomes a casualty. When accountability turns selective, corruption becomes normal. And when threats replace dialogue, we all lose. She reminded everyone that the role of justice isn't to intimidate, it's to uphold the law without bias. When an official uses their influence to target critics, they don't just attack individuals, they attack the foundation of trust that holds the country together. And once that trust is gone, restoring it is almost impossible. Crockett's confrontation exposed a truth that many in Washington quietly admit but rarely say out loud: power protects itself. It punishes dissent, it rewards silence, and it counts on the public to get distracted. But this time people noticed. Her response wasn't just trending online, it was resonating across communities tired of hypocrisy, because everyone, no matter where they stand politically, understands one simple idea: that nobody should be above the law. As she wrapped up, Crockett turned her focus back to the people. The health of our democracy, she said, doesn't depend on our politicians, it depends on us. Those words hit harder than any headline, because whether it's an attorney general, a billionaire, or a local official, power only works if we stop watching, if we stop caring. And she wasn't going to let that happen. Her speech wasn't just a defense of herself, it was a defense of the Constitution, a reminder that freedom of speech isn't negotiable, that representation matters, and that accountability must reach every corner of government, even the highest offices. She turned what could have been a political brawl into a civics lesson, and the lesson was simple: laws exist to protect people, not power. In an era of endless scandals and partisan wars, Crockett's moment stood out because it felt genuine. She didn't rely on rehearsed talking points or party scripts. She spoke like someone who's seen injustice up close and refuses to normalize it. That authenticity, rare in politics, is what made her words spread so fast online. Viewers shared clips of her speech across platforms with captions like "Finally someone said it, and this is how accountability looks." Even some of her critics acknowledged that Bondi's remarks went too far. And that right there is what leadership looks like, not when everyone agrees, but when truth cuts through noise. Her closing line summed up the entire confrontation in one phrase: "We don't need more threats, we need more truth." That's the kind of statement that sticks, the kind that reminds viewers why these moments matter, because at the end of the day, this wasn't about Bondi versus Crockett, it was about principle versus power. Crockett's fire, her conviction, and her willingness to speak out show why integrity still matters in government, even when it's inconvenient, and maybe that's why people can't stop rewatching the clip. It's not just entertainment, it's a wake-up call. In the end, she leaves us with one clear takeaway: democracy isn't a spectator sport, it's something we all have to defend, one act of accountability at a time, and that's exactly what she did, on live TV, with millions watching. So if you believe that no one should be above the law, that accountability matters no matter who you are, and that threats should never replace truth, then you know this story isn't over. Because moments like this remind us that the fight for fairness doesn't end in Congress, it continues with all of us. If you made it this far, don't just scroll away, share this story, drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Because this conversation about justice, integrity, and the people who try to silence it, is one every American needs to hear, and what happens next could change everything.